salamat sa Diyos sa isa na namang napakabuting araw at sa pagkakataon para matuto. Muli, ako ang inyong teacher, si Teacher Royce, at hayaan nyo na gabayan kayo at tulungan upang gawin natin ang math ay maging madali lang. Simulan na natin! Para sa araw na ito, ang pag-uusapan natin ay ang square roots of rational and irrational numbers. Ang mga focus natin ay approximating the square root to the nearest hundreds and plotting irrational numbers on a number line. Uunahin natin ang approximating the square root into the nearest hundreds. By definition, approximation is a process of estimating the solution of irrational and rational numbers. Here are the steps in approximating the square root into the nearest hundreds. Number 1, find two consecutive perfect squares in radical form where the given radical expression lies in between. Pangalawa, we need to extract the principal root of the two perfect squares. Number 3, based on the extracted roots, list at least 5 estimated values to the nearest tenths. Square each estimated value written as radicand, then get the radicands where the given radicand lies in between. At panghuli, further estimation. Follow the same pattern as the previous step. Use the conclusion to create another list of estimated values. This time to the nearest hundreds. To get closer, estimated value of the subukan natin. Ito ang example number 1. Approximate square root of 5 to the nearest hundreds. Gawin natin ang step number 1. We find two consecutive perfect squares in radical form where the radical expression lies in between. The radical expression given is square root of 5. So, the two consecutive perfect squares in radical form where square root of 5 lies in between are square root of 4 and square root of 9. Susulat natin ito sa ganitong pattern. Square root of 4 is less than square root of 5 and square root of 5 is less than square root of 9. Gawin natin ngayon ang step number 2. Extract the principal root of the two perfect squares. The principal root of square root of 4 is 2 and the principal root of square root of 9 is 3. So we will have 2 less than square root of 5, square root of 5 less than 3. Diretso na tayo sa step number 3. So based on the extracted roots, we will list at least 5 estimated values to the nearest tenths. Then we will square each estimated value written as radicand. Then we will get the radicands where the given radicand lies in between. Ang gagamitin nating root is 2. We will find or list 5 values to the nearest tenths of 2. So magsisimula ako sa 2.1 hanggang 2.5. Susulat na natin. The square root of 2.1 quantity square, square root of 2.2 quantity square, the square root of 2.3 quantity square, and square root of 2.4 quantity square, and last, the square root of 2.5 quantity square. So let us evaluate each. 2.1 square is equal to the square root of 4.41, the square root of 4.84, square root of 5.29, square root of 5.76, and the square root of 6.25. So based from the results, we will now get the radicands where the given radical expression lies. Again, the radical expression is square root of 5. So look for the radicands where square root of 5 lies in between. So narito. Square root of 5 is in between the square root of 4.84, that is equal to the square root of 2.2 quantity square, and the square root of 5.29, which is equal to the square root of 2.3 quantity square. So for our conclusion, square root of 5 lies between 2.2 and 2.3. In symbol, 2.2 less than square root of 5 less than 2.3. So let's proceed to step number 4, further estimation. We will follow the same pattern as step number 3, but this time, we will list 5 values to the nearest hundredths of 2.2. So, this time, I will start with 2.22 until 2.26. So, we write the square root of 2.22 quantity square. And we will do the same with 2.23, 2.24, 2.25, and 2.26. Let us evaluate each. The square root of 2.2 quantity square is equal to the square root of 4.92. Then we will get the square root of 4.97, followed by the square root of 5.02, the square root of 5.06, and the square root of 5.11. Now, we will get the closer estimated value of the given radical expression. Pinakamalapit sa square root of 5, but not more than square root of 5. At ito yun. The square root of 4.97. So we will not get the square root of 5.02 because it is over square root of 5. The square root of 4.97 is equal to the square root of 2.23 quantity square. Then we will now finalize the answer. So the square root of 5 is approximately the square root of 4.97, which is the closest, and the square root of 4.97 is approximately the square root of 2.23 quantity square. Therefore, square root of 5 is approximately 2.23. Ngayon, diretso na tayo sa example number 2. Approximate square root of 18 to the nearest hundredths. Now, step number 1, find two consecutive perfect squares in radical form where the given radical expression lies. So the square root of 18 is in between the two consecutive perfect squares in radical form, square root of 16 and square root of 25. So we write the square root of 16 less than the square root of 18 less than the square root of 25. Step 2, extract the principal root of the two perfect squares. Square root of 16 is 4, square root of 25 is 5. Now, step number 3. We will now list 5 estimated values to the nearest tenths of 4. So I will start with 4.1. So I will write the square root of 4.1 quantity squared, and I will do the same with 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, and 4.5. Evaluating each, we will get the square root of 4.1 quantity square is square root of 16.81. Then it will be followed by the square root of 17.64, square root of 18.49, the square root of 19.36, and the square root of 20.25. Based from the results, square root of 18 is in between square root of 17.64, which is equal to the square root of 4.1 squared, and the square root of 18.49, which is equal to the square root of 4.3 quantity squared. For our conclusion, square root of 18 lies between 4.2 and 4.3. In symbol, 4.2 less than square root of 18 and less than 4.3. Now step number 4, let's do further estimation. We will list 5 values to the nearest hundredths of 4.2. So I will start with 4.21 until 4.25. Then I will evaluate each. The square root of 4.21 quantity square is the square root of 17.72, and it will be followed by the square root of 17.81, the square root of 17.89, square root of 17.97, and the square root of 18.06. Now we get the radical expression closest to square root of 18, but not more than the square root of 18. And we will have this radical expression, the square root of 17.97. Square root of 18.06 is over the square root of 18. The square root of 17.97 is equal to the square root of 4.24 quantity squared. We now finalize our answer. The square root of 18 is approximately the square root of 17.97, and it is approximately the square root of 4.24 quantity square. Therefore, the square root of 18 is approximately 4.24. Dumako na tayo sa second part ng ating discussion, plotting irrational numbers on a number line. Here are the steps. Number 1, find two consecutive perfect squares in radical form, wherein the given irrational number lies in between. Number 2, extract the principal root of the two perfect squares. Number 3, square the midpoint between the two integers to approximate the position of the irrational number. And finally, number 4, plot the irrational number on the number line. Tara, gawin na natin. Ito ang unang example. Plot square root of 10 on a number line. So, step 1, we find the two consecutive perfect squares in radical form wherein square root of 10 lies in between. So, we have the square root of 9 and the square root of 16. So, the square root of 10 lies in between the square root of 9 and the square root of 16. Then, step number 2, we extract the principal root of the two perfect squares. Square root of 9 is 3, square root of 16 is 4. So we have 3 less than square root of 10 less than 4. Pangatlo, we get the midpoint of 3 and 4, then we square the midpoint. The midpoint of 3 and 4 is 3.5. Squaring 3.5, we will obtain 3.5 quantity square is equal to 12.25. Since 12.25, which is the square of the midpoint, is greater than the radicand 10, then the square root of 10 should be plotted less than halfway of 3 and 4. So let us plot square root of 10 on the number line. Here is a number line. Then here is the location of 3, the midpoint 3.5, and then 4. So we will plot square root of 10 less than halfway of 3 and 4. So somewhere in this area, in between 3 and 3.5. So ilalagay na natin. Approximately, this is the location or position of the square root of 10. Sana ay nasundan at naunawaan. Ito pa ang isang example. We plot square root of 32 on a number line. So step 1, we look for the two perfect squares in radical form wherein square root of 32 lies in between. So those perfect squares are the square root of 25 and the square root of 36. Square root of 25 less than square root of 32 and less than square root of 36. Step number 2, we extract the principal root of the two perfect squares. We have 5 and 6. 5 less than square root of 32 less than 6. Then step number 3, we get the midpoint and square the midpoint of 5 and 6. 5.5 is the midpoint of 5 and 6. Then we square 5.5. So we will have 5.5 quantity square, that is equal to 30.25. And since 30.25, which is the square of the midpoint of 5 and 6, is less than 32, then square root of 32 should be plotted more than halfway of 5 and 6. So, ilagay na natin. So, the number line containing 5, 5.5, and 6. Square root of 32 should be plotted more than halfway of 5 and 6. So, somewhere in this area, in between 5.5 and 6. Pwede na nating ilagay. Approximately, this is the position or location of the square root of 32. Sana meron kayong natutunan. At dito matatapos ang ating discussion para sa araw na ito. Maraming salamat sa inyong panonood at pakikinig sa ating video. Nawa ay natulungan ko kayo at nagabayan upang mas maintindihan nyo ang inyong lesson. Gusto ko ring magpasalamat sa mga sumuporta sa ating YouTube channel at sa ating Facebook page. Shout out sa inyong lahat. Hindi ko kayo may isa-isa dahil sa dami. Pero taos puso akong nagpapasalamat sa inyo at sa inyong suporta. Hanggang sa muli, ako ang inyong teacher, si Teacher Royce. At magkita-kita tayo sa susunod na video. Maraming salamat. Paalam!